All right, welcome back. Now, when it comes to our next story, we are going to go and discuss about the latest big movie that has been released in theaters, which is the live action remake of Disney's Moana. And yes, I am planning to have a review that's going to be released later this week, but I will tell you right now that in terms of my thoughts on the picture, I will say that I liked it as much as I did the How to Train Your Dragon remake. And if you know my thoughts on that movie, well, I'm just going to say the same will go and apply to the Moana remake as well. But from there, a lot of people have been expecting that, well, since this is a Disney live action remake and it is based on a popular property like Moana, some have thought that, well, regardless of what the critics are going to say, then at that point, it might end up becoming a box office hit. And people have guessed that maybe it's going to do some pretty big numbers at the box office, or at least on its opening weekend. But unfortunately, it looks like it didn't really go and do as well as people thought. So in that regards, let's go ahead and talk about the box office opening weekend of Moana. Yes, the live-action remake of Moana was expected to go and be another summer hit, but at that point, some of the earliest predictions that people have made was possibly that maybe it could do quite well, where it would start out at either 75 million or maybe 80 million. Is that what happened? No, that's not what happened. And then later on, as we were getting closer to the summer, some people were guessing, okay, maybe, maybe it's a little bit too generous. So maybe the predictions, it could be more accurate to go and say that maybe it would be around 50 to 60 million dollars. Maybe it'll go and have that kind of a strong opening. Is that what actually happened? No, because the real box office results of what happened during this opening weekend for Moana was that it managed to make a total of $43 million. So yeah, quite the unfortunate leap of going from possibly making 75 to 80 down to just 43 million. In fact, this has often been noted to be almost on par, just a little bit above the Snow White remake. And from there, everybody is already saying that things are about to go downhill and things are about to go quite bad for the Moana remake. Even if some audiences did manage to enjoy it, it doesn't look like it's going to be the feature where it will make its money back. And considering how Disney can often be quite generous with the budgets of these movies, and especially the case with the Moana remake having a budget of $250 million, there is honestly a very strong chance that it's not going to be making its money back. Now, I'm not saying that it won't, because maybe there is a chance in the future that it could actually find a way to, find more of its audience and able to go and make a profit while it's still in theaters. But at this rate, however, those chances are a lot closer to zero than for it to go and actually happen. So yeah, even though it did manage to go and make it to number one at the domestic box office, it's already a bad sign that the Moana remake is not going to become a success for Disney. And by the way, just to go and give you some details right now, now going on to my source on Box Office Mojo, it actually states here that on top of its $43 million domestic opening, it did also gain an extra $52 million at the international box office, which, as I am recording this, gives it a worldwide total of around $95 million. On top of that, since we are talking about some box office news, I might as well go and bring up some of the others as well. We also got Minions and Monsters that managed to make it to second place with over $20 million during the weekend. And it's also worth noting that it has officially crossed the $100 million mark at the domestic box office, which currently gives it a worldwide total of over $280 million. And then you also got Toy Story 5, which managed to make it pretty well in third place with $18.5 million. And even though it hasn't even been a month since the movie was officially released in theaters, it's already doing tremendously well, where this weekend it has officially crossed the $400 million mark on the domestic box office. So don't be surprised if by next week, it'll officially become the highest grossing movie of 2026 domestically, where it'll go and beat out the Super Mario Galaxy movie. And this is not even to mention that it also has a worldwide total of $879 million. And one more thing to go and add is in regards to Michael. Even though it's been quite a while since the movie has been released, it has now become the first ever musical biopic to which it has managed to cross the $1 billion mark at the box office. But this isn't about any of these other movies. We're going to mainly go and look into the problems with Moana and why is it that it underperformed at the box office. Now, I want to go and state this right now. I know that I am not going to be the first to go and say this immediately, but there are a few obvious reasons as to why Moana did not do that well. And some might be rather shocked because the thing is right now, Moana is a very popular IP. Some would even say it's one of Disney's biggest IPs right now that can fairly be comparable to Frozen or Lilo and Stitch. And some people may have thought that, well, you know, considering how Lilo and Stitch became a massive success, then maybe Moana as well will become big, regardless of whatever controversies are happening on social media, regardless of what critics may say, that this could actually be a decent moneymaker for Disney. But right now, it doesn't seem to be. And why is that? Well, the main reason, number one, that I want to go and point out immediately, and this is something, of course, I will also bring up in my review, it's the fact that it's not a nostalgic movie, and it's still too early to be considered a nostalgic movie. Like, I've mentioned this before, that one of the most baffling things about this Moana remake, it's the fact that it didn't even wait until Moana is officially 10 years old. Like, it's not going to have its 10th anniversary until November. And at that point, it pretty much makes it hard to go and consider Moana a nostalgic property. Like, you're not going to see people coming in thinking like, oh, I remember as a kid when I saw the Moana movie, I want to go and re-experience that again. Because those people who were children when they saw the 2016 Moana movie, they're still technically considered kids. They're not really at the point where they can be considered nostalgic. You know, the funny thing is that I can't help but think about Inside Out 2. Like, you guys remember in Inside Out 2 when nostalgia is still in Riley's head and she still comes out? I was like, oh, do you remember the time? But then all the other emotions are just there like, no, nostalgia. It's not your time to be here yet. You gotta wait until you're like 23 years old, okay? You know, get back in there and we'll call you when to go and emerge. You know, I honestly feel it's like that. You know, it's honestly, this Moana remake is a lot like nostalgia in Inside Out 2. She's just coming in way too early for the sake of having that nostalgia effect. And that's honestly the only thing that I will say that the How to Train Your Dragon remake has above the Moana remake. Now, of course, I've already alluded to this, but honestly, I hate the How to Train Your Dragon remake. I think it's one of the worst remakes in terms of all these live action remakes, and that it's nothing more but like a corporate slop of a shot-for-shot remake, and this is why, like I even mentioned in that review, that I believe the shot-for-shot remakes are the worst kinds of these remakes because of how pointless they actually are. Like, even like, regardless if it is the Moana movie or How to Train Your Dragon, like when I was watching them in theaters, like I thought to myself, why the fridge am I even here when I could just be at home and watch the animated versions that offer me the exact same thing, but debatably better? But the thing is with How to Train Your Dragon, however, is that one thing that it has above Moana is that it was released a little bit later from its original. It was released 15 years after the first How to Train Your Dragon was released. So at that point, it just made it to be considered a nostalgic property, which is why people would go in and they would check it out and they would feel actual nostalgia when watching that feature. But in the case of Moana, it was not there yet. Again, this is a movie that came out in 2016, and we have even yet to reach the point that Moana would officially become 10 years old. So that is one aspect that is a massive detriment. And considering that these live action remakes are heavily lenient on nostalgia, I feel like that is a factor that Moana really did miss this mark on. It would have probably done a lot better if it were released much later, like in 2031 or even like in 2030 or something like that. If it waited just a few more years, then it would have had a better outcome where it would actually capitalize on the nostalgia factor, because by then Moana would officially be considered a nostalgic movie. But then there is also the second reason, and this is also a factor that people were just not really ready to go and have more big screen Moana adventures, and that is because of the fact that we just recently had one, actually, with Moana 2. And the thing with Moana 2 is that it didn't really come out that long ago. It was about a year and a half, or at the most, I would say almost 2 years ago, on November of 2024. Keep in mind, it's not that far from when I am recording today. And I will say that when it comes to Moana 2, I do agree that it's not a great movie. I'll even go as far and say that I believe it's Disney Animation's weakest movie in years. Much more than Strange World, much more than Wish, much more than any of the films that they have put out recently. I do feel like Moana 2 kind of missed its mark, and by the standards of Disney Animation, it is a lot more on the weaker end. But with that said, though, how it did at the box office is extremely impressive. It still managed to go and cross over $1 billion at the box office, and even domestically, it still did extremely well. In fact, let me go and double check, actually, just to go and have a quick search on what Moana 2 did. Because, yeah, like you look at the box office, it did amazingly. Even domestically, it managed to make over $460 million. And that's just in North America alone. So with those impressive box office numbers, at that point, it's safe to say that many people went to go and see Moana 2 when it was out in theaters. And this is not to mention, by the way, that it came out around the same time as the first Wicked movie, when that film was massively popular, and that turned out to be a massive phenomenon. The fact that Moana 2, even though it's not as critically praised or didn't get as better word of mouth as the first Wicked movie did, it still did amazing on its own. So in that regards, everybody already got their fill of Moana on the big screen. We don't need another one, which feels like literally a pale imitation to what we got with the original. And that's one thing I'll even add, like, I'm going to mention this in my review. At least with Moana 2, it does offer us a brand new adventure. It does offer us new materials with the fan favorite characters like Moana, Hey Hey, Maui, and more. So in that regards, honestly, again, it does raise the question that considering that many people have already gotten their Moana experience on the big screen recently, what's the point of having another one when that is just going to be offering the same thing as what we have already received with the first Moana? And that actually leads me to another point, and I've seen some bring this up, and I think it's worth mentioning at the very least, and that is actually the fact that since this is a shot-for-shot remake, that has ultimately become a double-edged sword. Because, yes, the fact that it's a shot-for-shot remake of Moana, that's kind of like the purpose of this entire movie. It's to go and completely re-experience Moana, but now everything is in live action, or the CG is now hyper-realistic. But there is also a detriment, and that is mainly the fact that it's a shot-for-shot remake of Moana. And the thing with Moana is that, like I said before, it's one of Disney's biggest IPs right now that can be fairly compared to the Mickey Mouse brand, or Frozen, or Stitch, or anything like that. And at that point, it is currently setting records on streaming, where Moana is one of the most watched movies on streaming. Not just one of the most popular movies on Disney Plus, but on streaming ever. So in that regards, when you do a shot-for-shot remake of one of the biggest movies on streaming, by that point, people will be asking the question, why would they want to go and spend a good chunk of their money and go out of their way to go to the movie theater, buy their tickets, maybe buy some popcorn and stuff like that, to go and watch Moana on the big screen, when they could just stay at home, save their money, and just watch the animated film, and they'll pretty much get the exact same kind of experience. Like, it ultimately just becomes very redundant by that point. And with all of these factors, this is exactly why we are seeing the Moana remake not actually doing well, and why it ultimately underperformed at the box office. And again, there is a chance that maybe it'll rebound and maybe it'll eventually find its audience, but it's going to be a lot more difficult, especially when the next major movies are going to be coming out very soon. I mean, coming this Friday, we are going to be getting the Odyssey, and that's going to be taking a lot of attention away from Moana, even if it's going after a completely different audience. But then at the same time, much later in the month, like in a few weeks, we're also going to be getting Spider-Man Brand New Day. So in that regards, it leaves a little room for the Moana remake to go and actually get a second chance. So ultimately, it's a pretty good sign that it may turn out to be a box office flop. And one more thing, by the way, because I want to go and quickly comment on this as well, because I know there are many people out there who are desperate for the live action remake trend to officially end. They are desperate to hear Disney say that they are no longer making these live action remakes, and want to do whatever it takes in order for them to just shut down all of these productions. Like, no joke, there are people out there who are so hyper fixated on their hatred of these live action remakes, they would want the remakes to be over before any of the actual wars that are happening right now for them to be over. So in that regards, you'll see a lot of people that are desperately hoping that because the Moana remake might turn out to be a box office flop, that this is a sign that it's going to be so over for these live action remakes. And I'm just going to go and say right now, no, not really. because I feel like we're kind of seeing a repeat of what happened last year with the Snow White remake, where people were celebrating its failure and that it might be a sign that, oh, maybe it's going to be over for these live action remakes, especially when they put the Tangled production on hold. Maybe it's going to be officially over. But then suddenly you got Toothless and Stitch who came in going, nah, fam, that ain't happening. We're still going on. And then the trend would go and continue. And this is not even to mention that when it comes to these live action remakes, Disney is still having a couple more going on, and other studios as well. Like, you got other studios, like you got Universal that's still doing the live action remakes of How to Train Your Dragon, with the second one that's going to be coming out next year. And then you got Amazon, who recently announced that they want to do one of Fern Gully: The Last Rainforest. And as for Disney, they still got the sequel to Lilo and Stitch that's happening with Chris Sanders both writing and directing, and you got the Tangled remake. I think it's going to take a lot more than just the Moana remake to flop in order to make things say that it's officially over. I think, honestly, if you want to go and keep an eye out for something that could indicate the end of the live action remake trend, I would say you got to go and keep an eye out on Tangled, because Tangled so far is doing a lot more right so far in terms of being a live action remake that could be successful financially. Maybe not creatively, that's going to be a whole other story, but considering that with Tangled, like that right now, that is actually considered a nostalgic property. And on top of that, Disney is pulling out the right moves in order to go and please the fans and do things like have Catherine Hahn play as Mother Gothel. If that turns out to be a massive box office failure, if that ends up getting the same results with what we are seeing right now with Moana, then at that point, now we can go and talk. Now we could go and talk about the possibility that maybe it'll be a box office flop. But for now, so far when it comes to Moana, yep, that looks like it has a stronger chance than not, where it's going to come out a failure. And yeah, I'll just say, I can see why it flopped. So with that said, now I would like to pass this on to the chat wall, and I want to go and ask you all, what do you all think about Moana underperforming at the box office? Do you guys think there is a chance that Moana could actually find that second chance and it could actually do well at the box office and be a sleeper hit? Or do you think there's no hope for the feature and it's just going to come out a flop? Let me know what you all think. All right, so let's see. Now, honestly, at this point, I don't care anymore. I always kind of knew that it wasn't going to be good to begin with, since, well, it's too soon for a remake. Personally, I haven't seen it, but based on what I've heard, it's basically the same movie, but with not as good CG and The Rock's bad wig. Also, I need to call out Catherine Lagaaya's bad take on animation. Did you hear that, Matt? So, yeah, not interested. Honestly, I haven't heard her take, honestly. I don't, like, I'll even say now, I didn't really care for Catherine Lagaaya's performance. I just thought, like, she's just okay at best, but still quite a downgrade compared to what we have gotten before with Ali Cravalho. Anyways, let's see. I mean, we shouldn't be all that surprised. The previous movie is less than 10 years old by the time the stream is done. I guess people did not want Gus Van Sant's version of Moana. If you don't know what I mean, he's the director of 1998 Psycho. Guess people don't want to watch the same thing, but in live action. Maybe Disney should take this lesson. Pick a movie that's more than 10 years old. Even the How to Train Your Dragon remake makes more sense than this. Exactly. Like, as I said before, at least Dragon did manage to wait over a decade until having its remake, so that the property that it's adapting is considered a nostalgic IP, which is what Disney didn't do right now. And I mean, like, with all this, it's kind of like if we would hear suddenly Netflix would announce that they would do a live action remake of K-pop Demon Hunters. Like, even if they would do it like in 10 years from now, it just wouldn't really work, and it would not make any sense whatsoever, considering that, like, with the hype of K-pop Demon Hunters, do we know if it's going to last for like 10 years? Do we know if the nostalgia is going to be strong? But either way, it just sounds like the kind of idea that it would be a flop as much as what we're seeing right now with Moana. Anyways, let's see now. What other comments? Well, I'm on. I'll start with this and then I'll go to the other one. Honestly, I've seen, it seems quite surreal and unthinkable that both a Minions movie and a Disney live action remake, at least of a recent popular film, the ones that bombed are like the earliest films like Dumbo and Snow White. But judging from this reception, I really couldn't care less, considering it's apparently just line to line, shot for shot, the same movie that I already have at home. Looks like The Rock's backup plan to boost his ego back after Black Adam bombed really hard. Yeah, you know what? I will say, if there is one extra scene that I can go and think of, I think it's literally just one time where we quickly have like a meanwhile scene where we just see what's going on back in Motunui, where we see Moana's dad just looking out of the distance, being concerned of how things are going with his daughter. No dialogue at all. Lasts for like a minute or two. And then we just go back to the movie itself. I think that's the one extra thing that they have added from Moana. So yeah, honestly, other than that, you're not missing out on much. All right. Let's see now. What other comments do we have here? Glad to see the live action remake of Moana not performing well on its opening weekend because it's a live action remake. What do you expect? I mean, thanks to Minions and Toy Story, the ocean is not going to be strong with this one. I mean, if I have a nickel where Disney is trying to translate a Disney character into live action, like Snow White and the Clever Boys and Moana with the Chef Frillis crab, I have two nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. And that's honestly another factor that you brought up, is that we already got some competition that's taking away the audience from Moana. Because is there really that much of an interest to go and see the Moana remake when there's already stronger options that are already getting a lot more positive word of mouth, such as either Minions and Monsters or especially Toy Story 5, which is already on its track to become one of, if not the biggest movie of 2026. So in that regards, like, you already got better options out there. Like, even for me, if I have to go back and watch another family film on the big screen right now, I would choose either to go and rewatch Minions and Monsters or Toy Story 5. Although I will say that if I do have the choice, I would definitely go and see Toy Story 5 again. I mean, it really is that good. But yeah, so overall though, I guess honestly, it's a surprise, but not a surprise at the same time. It's just because of Disney's dumb decisions of why it ultimately did not work out for the Moana remake.